My son threw stale coffee in my face and laughed. That coffee looked just like you. Old, bitter, forgotten. It hit before I could blink, a cold slap of humiliation that ran down my cheek and into the collar of my blouse. The mug shattered at my feet. For one long second the kitchen froze. Even the clock forgot to tick. He stood there, tall, perfect, and poisonous. My son, Jackson. That coffee, he said, his mouth curling, looks just like you, old and disgusting. The words hurt more than the spill. They landed in the same place that once held his baby laugh. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just opened the door and said, "Get out." He blinked, maybe expecting a fight, maybe mercy. He got neither. No tears, no words, no mercy. That was enough. He brushed past me, cologne slicing through the burnt bean smell, slammed the door, and left silence hanging from every nail in the house. Before we dive into my story, I want to know where you are watching from. And please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. The coffee smelled like yesterday. Burnt, bitter, forgotten. It clung to my blouse, my hair, the air itself, as if humiliation needed perfume. The clock above the sink kept ticking, but unevenly, as though even time hesitated to move forward after what it saw. Each tick sounded like judgment, each talk like mockery. I wiped my face with a trembling towel, slow, careful. Not because I was fragile, but because I didn't want to see how far gone I'd become. My reflection in the window answered anyway. A woman I almost didn't recognize. Wrinkles where laughter used to live. Eyes that had memorized too many goodbyes. Lips pressed thin, not from anger, but from years of biting back words no one cared to hear. I stared at her, the woman in the glass, and wondered when exactly she stopped being mom and became the problem. The kitchen carried the echoes of his laughter still. It didn't belong there. It was too sharp, too young, too cruel. And yet, I realized that cruelty hadn't arrived that morning. No. It had been practiced. Little rehearsals in tone, rolled eyes, unfinished calls, forgotten birthdays. Small cuts that didn't bleed until they all connected. I remembered every one of them. The first time he ignored my message. The first time he said, "You wouldn't understand." The first time he chose silence over truth. Each moment had been a rehearsal for this, a final act, a performance of disrespect perfected over years. And me? I was the audience who kept applauding, hoping the next act would be kinder. The room was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the faint drip from the counter. I cleaned the spill carefully, as if tidiness could undo betrayal. I replaced the mug pieces in the trash one by one. When the floor was spotless again, I sat down. The chair creaked under me like an old friend trying to comfort. I folded the towel, placed it neatly beside the sink, and exhaled. The shame didn't roar. It whispered. It perched inside my chest, cross-legged, patient. I had learned a lot of languages in my life: English, silence, survival. But humiliation was the most fluent. And that's when it hit me. Humiliation doesn't scream. It sits and waits to teach you grammar. I wasn't always this quiet. Once, I was loud with dreams. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, where buses ran louder than hope and rent was always due yesterday. By 14, my hands already smelled like bleach and dish soap. I used to tell myself that cleaning other people's homes was temporary, that hard work had an exit door. But some doors stay locked no matter how many prayers you knock with. Every morning I'd take 2 buses to Brentwood. Big houses with gates taller than dignity. The first woman I ever worked for said, "If you move quietly, you'll last." I didn't know she meant in life. By 16, I had memorized the difference between maid and help. One gets a thank you, the other disappears before guests arrive. I was always the one who disappeared. Then I met Darren. He had a smile that promised tomorrow and a temper that delivered yesterday. I was 17 and believed in both. We married in a small church that smelled of lilies and second chances. I wore a borrowed dress, one size too big. I thought love could fill the rest. For a while it did, until it didn't. The night he left, he didn't take much, just his shirts, his cologne, and the sound of his voice. He left a note on the counter that said, "You'll figure it out. You always do." He was right. I was 2 months pregnant then. The baby inside me became my reason to breathe when breathing hurt. When Jackson was born, I promised him 2 things. He would never see me beg, and he would never sleep hungry. I worked nights at a laundromat and mornings cleaning houses in the hills. There were days I didn't eat so he could. Nights I walked home because bus fare was a luxury. Still, I'd hum him to sleep with songs I made up on the spot, off-key lullabies soaked in exhaustion and love. He was my sunshine in a windowless room. When he laughed, it sounded like forgiveness. When he cried, it sounded like purpose. I remember the first time he lost a tooth. He hid it under his pillow and asked, "Do tooth fairies visit poor kids too?" I told him yes, and slipped a single dollar under his head before I went back to work. That dollar came from the change I'd been saving for a new pair of shoes. I wore the old ones a little longer. When he turned 6, one of my employers offered to pay for his school tuition if I agreed to work full-time. I said yes before she finished her sentence. I packed my things, moved into her servant quarters, and visited him on weekends. He'd wait by the window every Friday. Every goodbye on Sunday tore me open a little more, but love makes wounds you learn to live with. By the time Jackson reached high school, he was ashamed of the smell of bleach on my clothes. He stopped hugging me in public, stopped introducing me as Mom, started calling me Eleanor. He said it sounded more professional. I let him. Because mothers learn early that love often sounds like silence. College was his victory, but I wore the invisible medal. I sold the small plot of land my parents left me in Georgia just to pay his tuition. I told myself, it's not sacrifice if it's for your child. But sometimes sacrifice is just love wearing a funeral dress. He graduated with honors. I clapped until my palms hurt. He never looked at me in the crowd. Maybe he didn't see me, or maybe he didn't want to. The first time he brought Tanya home, she looked around my house the way people look at places they're glad they don't live in. She smiled with her teeth, not her eyes, and said, "So this is where Jackson grew up?" I said yes. She said, "It's humble." I said, "It's paid for." That was the day I realized some people see love as poverty when it's not wrapped in luxury. Years passed, and my boy became a man the world admired, and I became the woman he outgrew. He bought a new car, new clothes, and new manners that didn't fit his old life. He called less, visited rarely, and when he did, he sat like a guest, not a son. But I kept cooking his favorite meals just in case. I kept his room clean just in case. I kept believing just in case, because mothers are experts in just in case. One night, after he left without saying goodbye, I walked into his empty room. On the desk was a photo of him at graduation, smiling, arms open, future wide. I looked at it for a long time. The picture was still warm from the sun, but my chest was cold. That was the night I whispered to myself, I built a man from nothing, and he decided I was nothing. Tanya entered my life the way perfume enters a room, soft at first, then heavy, lingering, even when you wish it wouldn't. She wore heels that clicked like punctuation, and carried a smile that ended too early. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were arithmetic, always calculating what to take next. Rhonda, her mother, followed close behind, hair too blonde for her age, manners too polished for her truth. When she spoke, the air felt rehearsed. She called everyone darling, but you could tell she meant less than. The day Jackson brought them home, the whole house held its breath. I had spent hours cleaning, polishing the old dining table, warming the pot roast, setting out the floral plates I'd kept for special occasions. I wanted them to see where love had lived before pride evicted it. But the moment Tanya stepped through my door, she wrinkled her nose. "It's cozy," she said, letting her eyes wander across my faded curtains and chipped china. Rhonda added, So much character. It reminds me of simpler times. I smiled politely. Simple was their polite word for poor. Jackson laughed awkwardly, kissed Tanya's cheek, and said, "Mom's house is old school. She's not into modern stuff." He didn't mean to hurt me, but it still landed like a bruise. I watched her fingers glide over my wooden table, the same table where I taught him to read, to spell, to pray. She looked at it like it was something from a museum exhibit. Interesting, but untouchable. Dinner was a battlefield disguised as conversation. Every question was a bullet wrapped in sugar. "So, Eleanor," Rhonda began, "you must be so proud. Jackson tells us you worked domestically?" "Yes," I said. "I cleaned homes for families who could afford what we couldn't." Rhonda smiled with satisfaction, as if she'd just solved a mystery. "How admirable," she said, slicing her steak too slowly. Tanya nodded, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "I told Jackson you had that hard-working spirit. It's good he got that from you." She said it like hard-working was a disease that skipped generations. That night, after they left, I sat at the table and stared at the empty plates. The food had gone cold, but the humiliation was still warm. Love became loan. Pride became pawn. And somewhere between those two exchanges, I lost my son. The months that followed were slow poison. Tanya's presence grew like ivy, quiet, pretty, suffocating. She began calling the house her future investment. She rearranged Jackson's schedule, his friends, even his tone. When he called me, she was always in the background, laughing, whispering, listening. "Mom," he said one evening, "Tanya thinks you should take it easy now. Maybe sell the house and move somewhere smaller." "Smaller than this?" I asked. "It's too much for you to handle alone." "No," I said quietly. "It's just enough for me to remember who I am." He sighed, long and tired. "You always take things the wrong way." "No," I whispered after he hung up. "I take them the way they're given." Then came Rhonda's visits. Short, sharp, strategic. She'd sit on my couch with her expensive perfume clouding the room and her words dripping with condescension. "You know, Eleanor," she'd say, "Jackson has real potential. He could be someone important if he had fewer distractions." I'd nod, because arguing with pride only feeds it. The last time she came, she brought Tanya along. They stood in my kitchen like tourists, judging the scenery. Tanya glanced at my old fridge and laughed softly. "Vintage," she said. "It still works," I answered. "So does a horse," Rhonda murmured. "But we still drive cars." That night, I washed their lipstick marks off my cups with shaking hands. The water ran too hot. My heart too cold. Weeks later, Jackson stopped visiting altogether. He said work was busy, that life was demanding, that love had become something you send through voicemail. I knew better. It wasn't distance. It was detachment. One evening, I walked to his apartment unannounced. I carried his favorite meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, collard greens. The doorman looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Price, I'm sorry. Mr. Jackson said no visitors without an appointment." I forced a smile. "Even his mother?" He hesitated. "Especially his mother." I went home that night and didn't touch the food. The chicken turned cold, the gravy stiffened, and I sat at the table like a guest in my own life. Love became lesson, patience became punishment, and motherhood became a quiet room where hope echoes too loudly. The last straw came quietly, like betrayal usually does. I went to the bank one Friday morning to withdraw cash for groceries. The teller's smile faded. "Mrs. Price," she said softly, "your account shows zero balance." "Zero?" I repeated, certain I'd misheard. "Yes, ma'am. It was transferred 3 days ago." "To where?" She checked the screen. "An account under the name Jackson Arthur Price." My ears rang. The world blurred. The room tilted like a ship taking water. I left the bank without my receipt. The sunlight outside felt wrong, too bright for a day that had just stolen everything from me. At home, I sat on the floor beside the window. The coffee stain on my blouse was still faintly there. I pressed my hand over it and laughed. A small, broken laugh. Because that's how life does it. First it stains you, then it steals from you, and somehow it expects you to keep cleaning. I opened my drawer, pulled out my old notebook, and wrote the date in shaky letters. Then I wrote a single sentence. My son didn't die, but the mother in me did. I closed the notebook, placed it beside the same window where I used to watch for him coming home, and whispered, "So this is what love looks like when it stops pretending." For weeks after the betrayal, I moved through my house like a ghost in familiar rooms. Every sound was too loud, every silence too heavy. Grief is loud when it has nowhere to go. Then, one morning, I woke up before the sun and realized something strange. There were no tears left. Not because I had healed, but because even pain gets tired. I walked to the kitchen. The coffee mug he threw still sat in the trash, its handle broken clean in two. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. The stain on the floor had faded, but not disappeared, like humiliation that refuses to die. That's when it happened. The smallest thing. A smile. Not the kind that softens, the kind that seals. It wasn't warmth. It was clarity. A quiet agreement between my past and my present. I had nothing left to lose. I took out my old notebook, the one with oil stains and bent corners, and turned to a blank page. My hand trembled as I wrote, "Silence is sharper than shouting." Then underneath, another line. "Some storms don't come to destroy you. They come to teach you who you are when the roof caves in." That was the morning the crying woman died. And in her place, a quiet strategist was born. I opened the window. The neighborhood was waking, distant car engines, barking dogs, a radio playing old blues. For years I had lived like a servant in my own life, apologizing for surviving, for aging, for still being here. That ended today. I made a list, not of revenge, but of recovery. Revenge is hot, recovery is patient. Bank, legal aid, Walter. Walter was my first love, from a lifetime ago. He had become a lawyer, then retired when the world stopped being kind to men who cared too much. He lived 2 streets away, in a small apartment filled with dust and records. We hadn't spoken in years, but he always said, "If you ever need me, call before I'm gone." So I called. "Ellie?" His voice cracked like an old record. "It's me. I didn't think you'd remember my number. I never forgot it. I just never needed it until now." He paused. "What happened?" "I think my son stole everything I own." There was no gasp, no pity, only silence, the kind shared by people who've both been disappointed by blood. "Come by," he said finally. "Bring whatever you have." That afternoon, I walked to his apartment with a folder under my arm and grief in my pocket. His place smelled like coffee and regret. He still kept that same brown chair by the window where he used to read case files back when we were young. He looked older, but so did I. "Show me," he said. I spread out the papers, bank statements, forged signatures, transfer receipts. His eyes moved quickly, his jaw tightened. "This isn't carelessness," he said. "It's calculation." "I know. He forged your name." "I know that too." Walter leaned back, rubbing his temple. "Ellie, this is elder financial abuse. It's a crime." I nodded slowly. "So is breaking a mother's heart. But they don't have jail cells for that." He smiled, sad and proud all at once. "You haven't changed." "Oh, I have," I said. "I just learned to aim my pain." He agreed to help. We spent hours making copies, highlighting dates, drafting letters. Every page we touched felt like stitching up a wound. I wasn't chasing money anymore. I was reclaiming respect. As I left, Walter called out, "Ellie, are you sure about this? Once it starts, you can't undo it." I turned at the door. "I'm not undoing anything, Walter. I'm finishing it." Back home, I sat at the table where the betrayal began. The sunset spilled orange light through the blinds, painting my hands gold. I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Pain is patient. Justice must be too." Every night that followed, I wrote one new sentence. I didn't plan them. They arrived like visitors who knew their way home. Anger speaks too loud. Grief whispers truth. Some sons learn only when silence answers the phone. A mother's curse is not words. It's distance. My house became a courtroom of quiet rituals. The kettle whistled like a gavel. The ticking clock became testimony. And I, the judge, decided that mercy would not be granted. Not yet. When the paperwork was ready, Walter filed it under elder exploitation. The bank froze the accounts immediately pending investigation. I didn't celebrate. I brewed tea instead. Vengeance tastes better when it's warm and slow. That night, I stood by the window and watched the streetlights blink on one by one. The same street where I taught Jackson to ride his first bike. He fell 3 times, cried twice, and by the 4th try, he was flying. I remembered shouting after him, "Don't forget who let go of the seat." He laughed and waved back. He never knew that the letting go was the hardest part. Now, years later, I was letting go again, this time without a bike, without a laugh, without a return. I looked down at the red notebook resting on the table. The ink was still wet from my last entry. I touched the page and whispered, "Let him learn the way he taught me, by falling." And for the first time in months, I slept through the night. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and waiting. Fluorescent lights buzzed above me, sharp and unkind, the kind that expose every wrinkle, every truth you've tried to hide. I sat in the corner, holding my purse like a shield. The nurse called my name, Eleanor Price, the way people call a file, not a person. I followed her into a room painted the color of surrender. Dr. Evans was kind, but kindness doesn't soften certain words. He looked at me the way doctors look when they're trying to measure how much of the truth a person can survive. "Mrs. Price," he began, his voice careful, "your test results came back. I'm afraid it's leukemia." The word hung in the air like dust in sunlight. Beautiful, slow, deadly. He kept talking, white cells, platelets, chemotherapy, but I heard only one thing. Time has an expiration date. He paused, waiting for tears. There were none. I'd already spent them all on betrayal. "How long?" I asked. He hesitated, as if numbers were knives. 6 months, maybe more, maybe less. It depends on treatment. I nodded. "Enough," I said softly. He blinked. "Enough for what?" "To clean the record of my life." He didn't understand, but he didn't need to. I looked around the room, metal chair, white walls, a small poster that said, "Early detection saves lives." I almost laughed. Early detection can't save a soul already tired of forgiving. He suggested chemotherapy, but I shook my head. "No needles," I said. "I've been punctured enough." "Mrs. Price," he said gently, "without treatment." "I'm not refusing life," I interrupted. "I'm refusing a slow death." He sighed, wrote something on his pad, and looked at me the way people look at old trees, admiring their strength while predicting their fall. "Is there anyone you'd like me to call?" he asked. I thought of Jackson, of the coffee, of the silence that followed. "No," I said, "there's no one left to call. But thank you, doctor. You've given me a deadline, and that's a gift." I walked out of that clinic into sunlight so bright it almost felt new. The wind caught my scarf and tossed it across my shoulder like a blessing. 6 months. I whispered it like a mantra. 6 months to put things in order. 6 months to rewrite my ending. 6 months to remind the world that quiet women leave loud echoes. On the bus ride home, a young mother sat beside me, rocking her baby in her arms. The child giggled. Pure, unguarded, eternal. I smiled. Life never stops being beautiful, even when it stops belonging to you. When I reached home, I placed my medical papers in a small wooden box under the bed, beside my red notebook. Then I brewed tea, strong, bitter, perfect, and sat by the window as the city yawned into dusk. I wasn't angry at God. I was grateful for the clock. There's something liberating about knowing your time. It rearranges priorities. It teaches you how to stop begging for kindness and start building closure. I opened the notebook and wrote, "Death isn't the thief. Delay is. 6 months is not punishment. It's mercy disguised as a deadline. Before I leave, I'll teach him one last lesson. Not how to live, but how to face himself." I closed the book, set it beside my teacup, and whispered to the night, "I've forgiven the years, but not the silence." Then I smiled, steady, certain, alive. Because sometimes, knowing the end is near doesn't break you. It focuses you. And that's exactly what it did for me. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The sky outside was a soft bruise of blue and gray, the kind of color that holds its breath before the sun decides to rise. I boiled water, not for tea this time, but because I liked the sound. The whistle of the kettle had become a kind of company, a reminder that something in the house still obeyed me. 6 months. I repeated it as I poured the water, like a prayer and a promise. 6 months to make peace. 6 months to make him remember whose hands raised him. I dressed slowly, choosing my best blouse, the one with small embroidered flowers near the collar. It was old, but clean, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a dying woman. I saw an ending written in neat handwriting. That day, I went back to Walter's apartment with purpose, not pain. He looked surprised when he opened the door. "Ellie, you look different." "I am," I said. "I've decided not to waste time forgiving people who aren't sorry." We sat at his table again, the same spot where justice had started to take shape. He'd already done most of the groundwork, reviewed the bank trails, printed evidence, and prepared the elder abuse complaint. He slid a folder toward me. "This will freeze the accounts until the investigation is complete. Once it's approved, he won't be able to touch a cent without explanation." I opened it, read the first page slowly, and traced my finger over my name. It felt strange to see it written on something that wasn't a bill or an obituary. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "I was ready the moment he said I was old and disgusting," I said. He mistook quiet for weakness. That's my favorite misunderstanding. We filed the paperwork that afternoon. The clerk looked at me the way young people look at the elderly, half pity, half dismissal. But I didn't need belief. I needed signatures. When we left the courthouse, the air outside felt lighter, like the world had been holding its breath with me and finally exhaled. I thanked Walter for everything. He offered to drive me home, but I declined. "I want to walk," I said. "I need to hear my own footsteps." On the way, I stopped by Brenda's house, my neighbor, the retired accountant. She greeted me in her nightgown, her hair tied up in a scarf. "Ellie, you look like a woman on a mission," she said, smiling. "I am," I replied, "and I need a witness." We sat at her kitchen table, drinking instant coffee that tasted like burnt hope. I told her everything, the transfers, the forgery, the clinic. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she placed her hand over mine and said, "If God gives you time, use it like evidence." I smiled. That's the plan. Brenda helped me organize my notebook properly. Each section now had a title: money taken, documents forged, words said, lessons learned. Every evening, after dinner, I filled another page. I wrote not in anger, but in rhythm. The notebook became my courtroom, my prayer book, my confession. Today I learned that justice doesn't knock, it waits for you to open the door. Revenge and righteousness wear the same shoes. The difference is how you walk in them. My silence is not surrender, it's strategy. I didn't tell anyone about the diagnosis. Not Brenda, not Walter, not even Doris, who still called to gossip about the neighborhood. Some truths lose power when spoken aloud. Days turned into weeks, letters were mailed, calls were made. The system began to turn, slow but certain. Then one evening, Walter phoned. "They froze the accounts, Ellie. All of them." For a moment I said nothing. Then I whispered, "Good." He hesitated. "Are you okay?" "I'm alive," I said. "And for now, that's enough." After the call, I made tea. The whistle sounded like applause. From that day forward, I created a new ritual. Every night before bed, I would write one sentence, just one, then close my notebook and whisper a prayer. Not for mercy, not for him, for strength. Dear God, let my silence be heard louder than my pain. Dear God, if justice takes time, give me enough of it. Dear God, if he ever looks for forgiveness, let him find the truth instead. The prayers didn't ask for miracles. They prepared me for consequences. One night while writing, I heard children laughing outside. Their joy bounced off the pavement, careless and free. I remembered Jackson's laughter when he was small, how he'd throw his head back, eyes closed, trusting the world completely. Where did that boy go? What kind of love did I give that turned into greed when it grew up? I didn't have the answers, so I wrote instead, "A mother's greatest sin is raising a child who forgets her humanity." The following week, Walter and I met with a federal officer from the IRS Elder Protection Division, an old acquaintance of his. We handed him the file, the copies, the statements. He promised to process it quickly. "If your son tries to move the money internationally," he said, "we'll stop it before it clears." That was the first time I felt peace in months. Not happiness, not satisfaction. Peace. The kind that sits beside you, silent, steady, and familiar. When I returned home that evening, I cooked myself a small dinner, rice and beans, simple, sacred. I sat at the table with my meal, the red notebook beside me, and whispered, "I've finally done something for myself." Later that night, I looked through old photo albums. There was one picture of Jackson at 8 years old, missing a front tooth, holding a birthday cupcake. I touched his little face with my thumb. "You were my favorite chapter," I said softly, "but you don't get to be my final one." I closed the album and wrote my last line for the night. "Justice wears patience like perfume. You can't see it, but everyone will smell it when it arrives." Then I turned off the lights and went to bed. And for the first time in a long time, my dreams were quiet. Rome smelled like rain and regret that morning. The embassy walls were white, cold, and echoing. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Too bright for forgiveness, too sterile for love. I sat on a metal chair that creaked with every breath I took. Across from me were people waiting for visas, renewals, second chances. I wasn't there for any of those. I wasn't there as a mother. I was there as evidence. The officer behind the desk glanced at my papers and said, "Mrs. Price, we'll bring him in shortly. You'll need to witness the signing." I nodded. That's why I came. My fingers traced the edge of my red notebook resting on my lap. I'd brought it with me like armor. Inside were the words that built my backbone when my heart tried to collapse. Then the door opened. Jackson walked in. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not in height, but in certainty. His hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes swollen from sleeplessness. Tanya wasn't with him, neither was Rhonda. He froze when he saw me. "Mom," I didn't stand. "Sit down, Jackson," I said. My voice surprised me, steady, level, calm. The kind of calm that frightens people who expect chaos. He sat across from me, avoiding my gaze, staring at the floor. The silence between us stretched until it became a wall. The officer began explaining the procedure, legal terms, account numbers, authorization forms. But all I heard was the sound of a pen clicking, a small, metallic heartbeat. "Mr. Price," the officer said, "sign here to release all access to the joint accounts under investigation." Jackson picked up the pen. His hand trembled. He looked up at me once, searching for mercy. He found none. He signed. When the ink touched paper, I exhaled the grief I'd been carrying for years, quietly, almost peacefully. The officer nodded, stamped the document, and left us alone to have a moment. He didn't understand that this was the moment. Jackson broke the silence first. Mom, please. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I looked at him, finally. Really looked. His eyes were the same as when he was 5. Wide, afraid of thunder. But the man in front of me wasn't a boy caught in a storm. He was the storm. You threw coffee in my face, I said softly. He swallowed. Mom? I raised my hand. Let me finish. My voice didn't rise, it lowered, and that made it heavier. You said it looked like me, old and disgusting. You laughed. And that day I realized something. You weren't my son anymore. You were a stranger I raised. He closed his eyes, tears fighting to stay hidden. I came here to watch you sign because I needed to see if guilt could still make your hands shake. It does. He looked up at me, shame spreading across his face like a slow bruise. I lost everything, Mom. Tanya left. Rhonda's gone. I have nothing. I nodded once. Good. His mouth opened in shock. Because now you finally know how it feels to live where you left me. Empty. He covered his face with both hands, shaking. I didn't mean to hurt you. Yes, you did, I said quietly. But I don't hate you for it. He blinked through tears. You don't? No. Hate is a luxury for people who still care. I stopped caring the day you forgot who fed you before the world did. He wept openly then, his shoulders folding in on themselves. A young man behind us, maybe a tourist, pulled out his phone and began recording, unaware that he was capturing the final chapter of a family. I stood up. The metal chair scraped the floor, sharp and final. Jackson lifted his head, red-eyed, broken. What are you going to do now? He asked. I leaned closer, just enough for my words to land where coffee once did. I'm not doing anything, I already did. You threw coffee in my face. I just returned the mirror. He stared at me, speechless. When I turned to leave, I heard the faint click of that stranger's phone camera. I didn't stop him. Some moments deserve witnesses. Outside, the air was crisp. Rain had stopped. The city glowed silver under a late afternoon sun. My scarf fluttered in the wind, and for the first time in years, I didn't pull it tighter. I let it move. By nightfall, the video had spread online. Thousands of views, comments from strangers across oceans. Dignity doesn't age. She didn't scream, but I felt it. That's how you teach without hate. They called me strong. I wasn't strong. I was finished. And finishing something takes more courage than starting it. Back in my hotel room, I stood before the mirror. My reflection looked the same. Tired eyes, thinning hair. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't carrying him anymore. I wasn't carrying guilt, just truth. I opened my notebook and wrote, Justice doesn't always punish. Sometimes it exposes. Some apologies arrive too late and some mothers stop waiting. I placed the notebook on the nightstand and turned off the light. In the dark, I whispered the final words of the day. I didn't come to ruin him. I came to remind him who I was. The plane landed in Los Angeles beneath a gray sky that looked half asleep. I stepped out into air that smelled like home. Dust, diesel, and distant hope. The city hadn't changed. Same cracked sidewalks, same corner stores with flickering neon lights. Same people chasing the next day as if it owed them something. But I had changed. I wasn't returning as the mother who waited by the window. I was returning as the woman who learned how to close it. My body felt weaker, but my soul walked taller. Each breath was measured, each step deliberate. I wasn't rushing anywhere. The finish line was already in sight. Walter met me at arrivals. He took my small bag, light, almost empty, and smiled faintly. Home, he said. Yes, I replied, but not for long. He didn't ask questions. Some goodbyes begin quietly, long before the last one. The days that followed were gentle in their routine. I spent mornings on the porch with my tea, afternoons reading old letters, and evenings writing in my red notebook. My handwriting grew shaky, but my sentences became clearer. Peace isn't what you find. It's what you stop fighting. Love doesn't expire. Expectations do. Neighbors visited with casseroles and concern. Brenda checked in daily, pretending to borrow sugar, but really checking if I was still breathing. I let her. Some kindnesses don't need correcting. My house was quiet, but not lonely. The silence didn't mock me anymore. It obeyed me. Then, one Sunday morning, I saw something strange on my porch, a small white bag with a bakery logo I hadn't seen in years. Inside were 3 donuts, glazed, still warm. My favorite. No note, no name, just memory. The next Sunday, the same thing. Different bag, same kindness. I didn't have to guess. A mother always knows when her child is trying to speak without words. He never knocked. He never called. He just came when the street was quiet, left the bag, and disappeared before dawn. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the only apology he knew how to give. And I accepted it, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. I started leaving something for him too, a single flower in an empty mug by the door, a silent conversation between 2 people learning to talk again through gestures instead of pain. As weeks passed, my body weakened. Some mornings I couldn't make it out of bed until the afternoon. But the strange thing about dying is how alive it makes you to small things. The smell of rain on the window, the softness of an old blanket, the way sunlight lands on your hand like a quiet blessing. Walter visited often. He brought paperwork I never read, stories I barely followed, and laughter that filled the air enough to make me forget the ticking clock. One evening, as he helped me sort through my mail, he asked softly, "Do you regret it? Any of it?" I looked at him for a long time before answering. No. Regret is for people who think they had another option. I didn't. I raised him. I lost him. I forgave him my way. That's enough. That night, I opened my red notebook for the last time. My hands trembled, but my words didn't. My son, love is not demanded. It is given. If you've learned that, then you're not lost anymore. Don't look for me when I'm gone. I'll be in every mistake you choose not to repeat. I folded the page neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote his name on it, Jackson. Then I placed it on the table beside the donuts he'd left earlier that day. The next morning, the sun rose quietly, respectful of my rest. I sat on my rocking chair wrapped in my shawl, notebook on my lap, tea gone cold beside me. The world was calm, as if holding its breath. That's how Brenda found me, head tilted slightly, eyes closed, a small smile still lingering. She thought I was asleep, and maybe I was, just not the kind she could wake me from. News spread through the neighborhood before noon. People brought flowers, prayers, and tears. Children I'd given candy to left drawings on my porch. Someone played an old blues song from their phone, the same one I used to hum while sweeping the floor. Walter arrived last. He walked into the room, placed his hat over his heart, and whispered, "You finished it, Ellie." They buried me under a tree behind the small church I used to pass on my way to work. No speeches, no fancy flowers, just quiet, sunlight, and peace. Jackson came later, alone. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't bring a camera, just a crumpled letter from my notebook found on the table beside his donuts. He knelt by my grave and read it aloud, his voice breaking on every line. When he reached the last one, he couldn't continue. He pressed the letter to his chest and whispered, "I understand now." He stayed until nightfall, talking to the wind as if it could carry his words to wherever I'd gone. Then he walked home, not the man who left, but the son I always hoped would return. They say he lives in the same house now, keeps it clean, keeps it quiet. The neighborhood children say he leaves donuts on the porch every Sunday. Just one bag, never more. He doesn't tell anyone why. And on the table by the window, there's still a red notebook. He doesn't write in it, but he reads from it every morning. Love is not demanded. It is given. Sometimes he whispers it aloud like a prayer. And when he looks out the window and the wind shifts just right, maybe, just maybe, he hears me say it back. No tears, no words, No mercy. That was enough.